Little Tim was just a boy who saw and felt what the bad men did. Peter was there to absorb the pain they inflicted. Gary felt the guilt of not being able to stop them. Troy carried the anger and suffered the consequences. These are just some of the personas created by our next guest to survive sexual, physical and emotional abuse as a child.
Many years later, he came to terms with what had happened by learning to forgive himself. He now wants to give time to help others. And with an extraordinary tale of surviving child abuse, we welcome Tim Roy. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning, Tim.
Good morning.
You've just written this. This is your autobiography, and might I say that this is a very difficult book to read. It must have been an even more difficult book to write.
Yeah, quite cathartic. It's been a world of self-discovery and a world of actually going through the pain and suffering, even though I'm an adult and I'm aware that I'm not really that vulnerable as I was as a child. It was still quite relevant to go through that process, and I'm sure most survivors find that when they actually are getting to a point of actually accepting and becoming aware originally, and then accepting and then finding some application to live their life with.
Because you endured the most horrendous sexual and emotional and physical abuse. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Well, it was hidden for so long, you know. My brother lived with it for a long time and was quite open about it, and I lived with quite denial, which the other siblings of my family still do, and I respect that. That's where they want to be. It's not something you can actually take someone away from if that's their protectionism. That's where it was. For me, I just created different identities with each emotion that became overwhelming, that the little bloke couldn't handle. He would create a friend, and that's how we deemed it.
But it was at the hands of your parents, though, wasn't it?
Originally, it was my father. Yeah, my father was sort of a mule for some sort of pedophile ring at the time, and that sort of was pretty strong up to about the age of 10.
So he would deliver you to the pedophile ring?
Yeah, unfortunately. And, you know, after the age of 10, due to the concept of the New South Wales court system back in those days, that children weren't really credible in a court at up to the age of 10. And then after 10, you know, I found myself being prostituted out. And his safe zone was that I would switch. You know, Peter would carry the pain and Tim wouldn't even know what was going on.
But given that you created these personas, or these personas developed to shield you from this abuse, what do you remember of the abuse? Do you remember?
Yeah, I do now, because I've had to actually absorb that they were my reality. At
the time, you didn't?
No, I just would place myself into a zone of being triggered and knowing that something's coming up. So the personas that had the responsibility to keep the information away would then step up and take on that role. If I can explain it this way, we all have different roles and different modes we deal with every day. You know, some of us are mothers, fathers. We go to work, we go to play. You know, we have brothers and sisters. We all react and interact differently with those individuals. However, for me, and for the majority of our population, is that people know when they're switching into those different modes. For me, I didn't know that.
There were some female modes too.
Yeah, there was one I had to finally accept. It was very hard to accept that. You know, I was sort of felt that was quite a homosexual thing, and I'm being abused homosexually for a long time. I held on to my heterosexuality very strongly, and there's a persona known as sexy that is very strong in that component. So,
when did you realise that you had all of these different personas? With
the help of Dr. Jan Ewing in Brisbane. She assisted me to come to an understanding, and I worked with a acting coach by the name of Martin Chalice up there, and with those two individuals, we finally came to an understanding. Well, I came to an understanding that there's a possibility here that something more is there. And in my writing, I wrote 2 books. The first book was to deal with my army life. The second book was to deal with the fact that it came in some sort of incarnation at this point in time that there's 2 individuals doing the whole story, you know. So
you mentioned your army life, which is a very significant part of all of this. There was even a persona that got you the ability to pursue that army career, really, wasn't it?
There was, yeah.
So it wasn't all there to hide abuse, was it?
No, it's more. It wasn't never. It became dysfunctional when it became imploded, and that implosion was that if we stayed in the arena or in the environment we were in, we were going to be discovered. So the actual system maintained its own momentum by imploding itself at certain times, and we would get out of that situation and move on. So ultimately, I've had a transient life, and even within the military, because I had this persona that actually was what they wanted: cold, hard, uncalculating, unemotionalist.
Yeah.
You know, once I actually left the military, the biggest crutch I had, the biggest collapse I found in my life, was that I didn't have any emotions.
Yes.
Oh, okay. And so that's what triggered that something was just not right in your
Yeah, that's
life.
why I had to find out
Were you
what
drinking?
was. Yeah, well, drugs and alcohol became the substitute. You know, sex became the substitute. It was just, my world at that time was, you know, a congealed ball of, you know, I use the analogy of the golf ball with the string just completely bound up.
Yeah.
That there was no defining emotions. And this is where Martin Challis and Dr. Jan started to realise. I mean, Dr. Jan was probably dealing with me for 12 months before she actually decided that I was safe enough for me to let me know that there's a possibility that you're carrying more personas
What's
around.
that? What could that moment possibly be like? You must sort of deny it at first, or you wouldn't believe it, would you?
I lived with denial all my life. You know, it was a watershed moment. You know, to actually accept it, and quite strenuous, and you know, to actually start to raise up this suppressed stuff, and then to believe it. You know, and the only way I explain
And to accept it.
Yeah, I mean, my theory I sort of try to share with other survivors is the triple A theory. You know, awareness, acceptance, and application. You know, and the application I want to put out there to society these days is probably society needs to take a bit more responsibility for our children around us. You know, I don't really think it's the victim's situation to take a pedophile to court. I think we could find that way where we actually deal with victims who actually, you know, their story gets squashed and mashed because the prosecutor needs, or sorry, a defendant needs to get his charge off.
Why is it, I mean, I mentioned in the intro, you said that that it was important for you to forgive yourself. What could you possibly need to forgive yourself for? I don't understand.
Well,
Like, it wasn't your fault, you were a kid.
Yeah, well, it's all, in essence, I was a kid. However, I still have to accept the actions and behaviours I had, even though I was dealing with different personas who were in control of my life at that point in time. For me to actually come full circle,
Okay.
I had to accept that I actually had responsibility for that. So I had to accept for the addiction I put myself in, the self-abuse I put myself in, you know, the ills and woes I put on other people are all part of me actually coming out. I have no concept of forgiving the pedophiles. I don't understand that, you know. To me, that's like, if I forgive them, then the 100 other people that have been affected by that person has to forgive them at the same time for it to become a relevant situation.
Well, you actually said that you would make a commitment to go and visit pedophiles in the jail systems around the country.
Well, this is where the books led me, and I've had an inspiration. I missed my own launch, you know. Who misses their own book launch? Seldom Rusky, I suppose. I don't think he would have got there either.
Boom, boom, yes.
Yeah, so, you know, I sort of sat there and went, what is that about? Why am I missing this? There must be something I need to share with these individuals when I finally get the chance. And I got the chance to share with the Pan Macmillan distributors who were distributing my book that, you know, what came to me was an inspiration. I want to go back, I want to go into these prisons, and I want these pedophiles, and same as I was done with the military, which was conditioned life to actually get the job done properly. I want to have the opportunity to passive condition these individuals to hear dysfunctional stories of their victims.
So you want to sit down with pedophiles in prison and tell them what it was like to be abused by a pedophile?
Yeah, not necessarily what it's like to be abused, because unfortunately the sick minds we deal with in that situation, that might be enjoyable to them.
Yeah.
I want people to tell me, and they came through ASCA, you know, write their stories, as I've written my stories, of what's dysfunctional in their life. You know, how much damage has happened because they got abused at 5, and at 18 they're finding themselves on the streets, or they're finding themselves addicts, or they can't have relationships, or you know, the myriad of problems that we deal with. 1 in 3 girls under the age of 16 and 1 in 7 boys under the age of 16 are abused. And we've got this dysfunction that goes on. You know, these statistics that ASCA's given to me.
So one would think that reasonably we should all be paranoid about our children. You know, with those sort of statistics, that makes me really...
We need to be proactive. We need to be... I mean, I use the analogy with the army. When we put women into very close working wise, but early 80s it wasn't there, early 90s it was there, you know, and soldiers had to start to adapt and change the way they were thinking about things, okay? And that took some time, and a lot of blokes, older blokes, just couldn't come to that concept, so they had to be moved on. Because we adjusted and changed to the society we were in. So where I want this understanding to go is that our society takes on that responsibility of actually, okay, if someone is doing a behaviour that you think is untoward, let's approach the authorities,
Stand
let's
up.
approach the
Yeah.
safety individuals, let's approach the police, and if that person needs to be educated, then let's hope that happens.
Look, we're out of time, but I'm going to ask you one more question. Why did your parents do it?
The only way to truly understand why pedophiles are pedophiles is control. Did it happen to them? I don't know. I never really had time to actually sit there and try and decipher. They just lived in, well, my father just lived in denial. I was not invited to the funerals. You know, there was no contact when I came to the realisation that this had happened. You know, my truth is I can read my story and I get goosebumps. I know it's my truth.
Yeah.
Oh,
Tim,
It's a
thank you for your
really
time
brave
this
book,
morning.
and I so hope that writing that helped you,
Oh.
because it's an amazing story to get on paper and to share.
You said it gave you goosebumps. It'll give the reader goosebumps as well. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you,
Lovely to
guys.
meet you,
Thanks
Tim.
for sharing.
Good on
All
you
the
for your
best.
bravery. Dr. John Irvine has the solution to mealtime mayhem right after this.